Hello knitters, Barbara Benson here. I'm an independent knitwear designer who also likes to make videos here on my YouTube channel, Watch Barbara Knit. Make sure to check in the description below the video where you will find links to anything I talk about in the video, including how to get my patterns for you to knit up for yourself, how to join the Watch Barbara Knit Facebook group, and how to support me on Patreon. Today, I'm going to talk about something that might get me in a little bit of hot water or at least rile up some lively discussion. And it's something that is frequently discussed in some of the circles I travel in, being knitwear design and crafting design and things like that. And that is copyright. Understanding copyright and how it applies to knitting and knitting patterns and design. And the first thing I'm going to say is I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. Nothing I should say, I'm going to say should be construed as legal advice. But that said, I have had to spend time doing research and reading about and understanding how it applies to my work and my job. And I wanted to share with y'all some things because there are a lot of myths about copyright and things like that and how it applies to knitting. And I also want to make you aware of some things you might not be aware of that are actually copyright violations. And that's where I got the title, Is Your Knitting Pattern Illegal? Because you might be, or someone you know might be, in violation of those copyright laws without even realizing it and without doing it deliberately. So I wanted to share. I actually have some notes here to make sure I hit the things that I want to hit. So if you see me looking down, that is what it is. And the other thing is, I only know what applies to me in being a US based designer, and copyright laws are all based on the country of origin of the person who created the copyrighted item. So what that means is, as a US designer, the copyright laws that apply to my designs are the US copyright laws. Doesn't matter if you're in another country and your copyright laws are different. The ones that apply to my designs are the US ones. If you are an Australia-based designer, there are different laws, and in ways they are more restrictive. And so as a US knitter, the laws that govern what you can do with an Australian based design are different. So it gets very, very complicated, but I'm going to tell you what I have learned. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is, okay, what makes something copyrighted? And according to US copyright law, intellectual property is copyrighted when it is created. So when you type it out and you publish it, it's copyrighted. Now, it is good to put that little copyright symbol with your name on it to the bottom so it's properly attributed, but that doesn't have to be there to make it copyrighted. So if you write something and you put it on your blog and it is published, it is copyrighted to you whether or not you have the word copyright on it. When you create it, it's copyrighted. When you take a photograph, it's copyrighted. Any of those things, when you write it down, when you create it, it is copyrighted as your intellectual property. That said, most things, it's smart to put copyright and the date so that you know when it was copyrighted. And then there's things that people put on it like all rights reserved and blah, 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 blah. And that's what we want to talk about. So that is, when is it copyrighted? It's copyrighted when you write it. So there you go. But what, in regards to knitwear designs, what is it that is copyrighted? And the answer to that is the written instructions and any associated illustrations, charts, diagrams, schematics, any of the physical things that are in the pattern that are communicating to the knitter how to create the piece, the actual written lines, the actual charts, those are what are copyrighted. Okay? What is not copyrighted is the design itself. In the United States, those fall under useful objects, I believe is the term. And what it is you can't copyright a stitch pattern and the visual appearance of a stitch pattern. You can't copyright a construction, how something is shaped, the technique used to do it. You can only copyright the written instructions, the schematics, the charts that you communicate that information with. So what I mean by that is, if I were to design something and I write it up and it's published in my book, I publish it as a PDF, whatever. If someone is able to look at my design and figure out how to knit it and reproduce it and then write up the instructions in their own words, then there has been no copyright infringement. I'm going to leave it to you how you feel about what taking someone else's, like, essentially art and I'm just saying legally that's not copyright infringement. You can't copyright a garter stitch. You can't copyright the visual appearance of a garter stitch scarf. And again, all we're talking about is copyright violation and legality, not any of the ethics or anything behind that. And there have been plenty of instances of, and I'm not going to point fingers, but of larger companies looking at designs, popular designs from smaller designers, and then rewriting the pattern, and it's literally the exact same visual appearance, but since it's a different set of instructions, there's no infringement. So there's that. But where there's a gray area is when you get into something that's actually, so useful objects, useful things are non-copyrightable, but there are things that are trademarkable. And then there's also things that are considered works of visual arts. So something like a crochet amigurumi, where it's a specific shape for a specific, like, stuffed animal or a bear, or that it's distinct and an artistic thing, those are actually considered soft sculptures, and they are covered by the copyright intellectual property laws that cover sculpture and art, and that's a different thing because it's not a useful object, it's art. And trademark is where you get into, if you have a knitting pattern that has an actual depiction of, say, a popular cartoon character. That cartoon character as art is trademarked. And so if you use that cartoon character, then you can get into trademark and violations of that sort. So things like intarsia, or very specific types of color work designs that fall into the art category more than they do the useful object category, there's a gray area there. But just don't knit anything that isn't, like, official. Like, I was in the official Star Wars book, right? And we were able to use the logos that are actually registered trademarks of Lucasfilm. You can get into trouble if they decide to pursue you if you use something that they have a trademark on. Like, you can't, like, you can write the word Star Wars, but, like, their logo itself, you might get into a fuzzy area. So trademarks are different than copyright is the story there. And art is different than useful objects. Clothing, all that kind of stuff, quilts, all those kinds of things. They are useful objects, and how you construct them cannot be copyrighted, but your instructions on how to do it are copyrighted. And there is where there is some situations that occur in the knitting community at large. So you purchase a pattern, a hard copy pattern. Can you make a copy of that pattern and give it to your friend? No, you cannot, because copyright covers the distribution of the copyrighted material. The only person who has the right to distribute the copyrighted material is the person who holds the copyright. Now, that person can give permission for other people to distribute, and then it's just fine. But if you have not received express permission to distribute, then you cannot distribute in any fashion. And when it comes to, like, you can't take a book like it used to be, and sometimes this would happen in a local yarn store. Somebody's like, I don't want to buy that whole book. I just want that pattern. Can you copy it for me? No, that is illegal distribution of a copyrighted material. You can't do that. And this is where I really want to make it clear. This also applies to free patterns. Just because the person who has the copyright has chosen to distribute it for free does not give anyone else the right to distribute that for free unless they've received express permission to do so. And this includes free internet patterns, okay? If you go to an internet site and you find a free pattern and you download it for yourself, can you then print out 16 copies and give one to each of your friends? No, you can't. That is illegal distribution of copyrighted material. One thing that I have seen that kind of, it makes me twitch is, I think it's awesome when local yarn stores and dyers make up kits that work with specific patterns. That is absolutely fantastic. And a lot of times yarn stores and places and smaller dyers will knit up samples in free patterns because that patterns are easily accessible to everyone. And that is fantastic. And packaging up that kit and saying this yarn works in X pattern, that is just fine. And providing information on where that person can go and get that pattern themselves is just fine. But if you then print out that pattern and stick it in the bag with the yarn and you're selling it as a kit, no, you are now distributing it and you are making money off of someone else's work and they're not getting anything out of it. And you just don't have permission to do it. Unless there are ones where it's like free and it says under the copyright information, you feel free to distribute that. And then that is fine. Or if you really want to do that, contact the designer and the designer might give you permission. I know that I have worked with local yarn stores with free patterns where they have contacted me and I've actually taken my original file and modified the copyright saying, and put on it, distributed with permission, distributed by X yarn store with permission from the author. And that is fine because, hey, it's kind of like promotion, but you need to get that permission. And I think that is really one of the reasons I wanted to make this video, is just because it's free to you doesn't mean, well, free to someone. I'm not pointing fingers at you, but just because it's free on the internet doesn't mean that anyone else can take it and then distribute it to wherever they want, because you can't. I mean, you shouldn't. It is in violation of copyright. And then, okay, distribution. Okay, I think I got, public domain. What if the thing that you desperately want to knit is out of print? I know it's frustrating and everything. And just because it's out of print, I mean, you're like, I'd be perfectly happy to buy it, but I can't find it to buy. Well, if it's gone into public domain, then yes, you can copy it till your head explodes. But keep in mind that public domain is the life of the author, of the originator, plus 75 years. So what it is somebody writes something, create something after they die, in 75 years after that is when it goes into public domain. So you're going to have to be looking at some very, very old knitting patterns for that. We're looking at Victorian era knitting patterns, and that's fine. And they're really cool ones. But if it's something that was published in the 70s, it's not in public domain yet. So no, it's not okay for you to find old magazines, scan them, turn them into PDFs, and then sell them on Etsy. And I say that because there are people who do that, where what they've done is they have done exactly what I just said. They have gone and found old things, created their own PDFs, and then are selling them because they're out of print. And that, again, is violation of copyright. And so you got to watch out. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's in public domain. Now, if you have your own book, if you own the book and you don't want to carry the book around, can you make a copy of it for your personal use? Yes, you own the book, you make a copy, you're using it. Can you make a copy of it and give it to a friend? No, that's distribution. That is violation of copyright law. One loophole there is libraries. If you can find a copy of the out-of-print thing in a local library, be it a magazine or a book, you are allowed to make copies of pages in the library book for your own personal use. So you don't own it, but you sort of rented it, because you do sort of own it, because libraries are public facilities and your tax dollars at work. It's fantastic. So you can, if you go to a library, check the knitting book out of library, you can make copies of certain pages. You can't reproduce the whole thing, but you can make copies and save them for your own personal use. Again, you can't give them to your friends. They're for you and for you only. And that is what is at the base of it all. It is about distribution. Personal use, you purchased it, it's yours to use. As soon as you start giving it to someone else, then you're becoming a distributor. And that is something that is covered by copyright. Going back again, though, if you can look at something and reproduce it and then write out the instructions for someone else, those are your instructions. It is doable. So those are just, one more thing. And I wanted to dispel a certain myth on copyright, this idea that if you take something and that there's some magic number that you can change X number percentage of it and it makes it yours and then it's okay, that doesn't exist. There is no magic number. There is no, if I change 10%, then it's new and it's original and it's no big deal and I'm not going to get into it. That's not true. So that is just a tiny, brief little bit on copyright. There's so much more that can be discussed, and I have linked. I have like 5, 6, 7 links that I'm going to include in the description, in the show notes, if you want to read further on this, because there is a lot more to this. Specifically, and I know that someone is going to be like, what about making something from a pattern and selling it? That gets into very, very gray areas. Okay. And I encourage you, if that is a question you have, to read some of the links that I've linked below, because what that comes down to is there really is no precedence. Like, there are interpretations of the laws, but it's not something that really there's been a lot of lawsuits on. There's not a lot of established judging by this is what's going to happen, because honestly, the stakes are so low. Most people can't afford to engage in litigation over these sorts of things. So if that's a curiosity, yes, I acknowledge I did not address that at all, but you might want to read some of the links that I have included so you can get information for yourself. So this is my little foray, my tiny little baby steps into a slightly controversial topic. If you've been watching my videos for any length of time, you know I'm not trying to rile things up. I'm not trying to... I like to keep things positive, but also it is frustrating as a knitwear designer to see your hard work quite literally stolen. Okay, because that really is what it is. When you say, well, it doesn't hurt anybody, but it does. It hurts the designer. Me just giving it to my friend isn't going to hurt anybody. Yeah, it does, because that's somebody else's. Okay, and it does. And when things are provided for free, and that is really the big sticking point, there's reasons for it being free. A lot of times it's going to be on a website. And when people go to those websites, those patterns are provided for free because those websites have advertising on it, and they get clicks and they get eyeballs and things like that. And the person is being compensated in that way, and taking that, going and looking and downloading yourself out of the picture can, you know, put a hitch in that particular giddy up. So, okay. I hope I haven't upset anyone really and truly, but I did think this was an important thing to talk about. So if you like this video, give it the thumbs up. I think this one might actually have some thumbs down that I'm not used to getting, but I'm ready for that. And if you like these videos, please click the subscribe channel and get notifications for when I upload new videos. Thank you very much.